Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and joining me for this episode, and it'll be an interesting one, is State Representative Sean Garbally of Arlington. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
Sean is the Vice Chair of the Joint Committee of Higher Education. So we're going to talk about the opportunities that our residents have, and residents across the state, to gain access to higher education for themselves and their kids. We know that Massachusetts has been ranked as the #1 state for public education, I think 6 years running. And one of the aspects of our public education that's been so successful is our higher education. Before we get into that topic, let's talk a little. I want to talk a little bit about you, Sean.
Absolutely.
You started at the legislature at a pretty young age. How old were you when you ran?
I was 22 when I first ran for the House.
And today is your 9th anniversary, right?
Today is my 9th anniversary of being sworn in.
That's congratulations.
Thank you.
So what motivated you at 22 years old to run for the legislature?
Well, Representative Gordon, that's a great question.
I'll be Ken for the.
Well, I appreciate that, but I call you Representative.
But I'll call you Representative Garbally.
I appreciate that, and I would call you Representative because obviously you're very well respected by your colleagues. You're someone who works really, really hard, and you're somebody that I really have come to appreciate as a colleague and a friend. And just looking at your bill on paid family medical leave, which is so important for working families across the Commonwealth, and you're someone that is so respected by your colleagues. So that's why you've earned the title of representative.
Well, so thank you, Sean.
To answer your question, it's been an honor to serve in the House of Representatives representing the people of Arlington and Medford for the past 9 years now. And what really motivated me was trying to bring about positive change and to try to get things done that would better people's lives in Arlington and Medford and across the Commonwealth. At the time when I was running for state rep, I was also serving a 3-year term on the school committee. So my background really has been in championing for public schools and public higher education. So that's why I'm honored to serve as the Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Higher Ed and as the Chair of the Public Higher Education Caucus.
So I'm doing math in my head, and this is interesting for me. I started in the legislature when I was in my 50s. When I was 22 and 20, I was finishing college, and as you may have been, and really thinking about beginning my own career. Yep. Many people aren't thinking then about public service, but from the math that I just did, so you were 19 when you ran for the school committee then. Yeah. In Arlington. Was that the first elected position you had in town government?
I was a town meeting member when I was 18. But I wasn't the first. Actually, a gentleman who's well known to Burlington residents because he was the former superintendent of Shawshene Tech, Charlie Lyons, was on the school committee in Arlington when he was 18. So he got me beat by a year. So we joke about that.
You followed in
on
his
a
sneaker
regular
steps,
basis.
though, huh?
I did.
So, but what? So tell me why. What motivated you? That's pretty unique.
Well, I served on the school committee, and so there was.
Tell me about what motivated you to serve on the school committee. I'm still back at that 18, 19.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, Ken, and it really started with my belief that there was a perspective that was missing on the school committee at the time, and that was the perspective of a student.
Yeah.
It was the perspective of somebody who was actually in the halls of our high school, our middle school, our elementary school, and knew what was happening, and wanted to bring that perspective to the school committee. And I think it would be similar here in Burlington. I think it's critical to have that perspective of somebody who really truly understands and experiences what is happening in the halls of Burlington High. So it was a similar thing with me at Arlington High.
That's a unique relationship that you must have developed and that you did develop with the residents of Arlington and Medford. You serving this long, but serving also in Arlington 3 years even before that. It's no wonder that when I look at elections, when you've been challenged, you've been very successful. I mean, you must know them and they know you pretty well.
Well, I'm very humbled by their support, and it's very similar to, I'm sure, how humble you are being able to serve the people of Burlington and Bedford and Wilmington. And it's something that none of us can take for granted. We deeply respect the will of the voters and have the honor of working on their behalf so that we can work together in our institutions in the House of Representatives to try to get things done.
It's really an amazing and it's an awesome opportunity that we have to help people, and frankly, to help a lot of people in a
Right.
short amount of time if we focus and have our priorities in order.
And I'm glad you said priorities, because we can never forget what we're on Beacon Hill to do, and that is to fight for the people that represent our districts, that make up our districts.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about higher education. We started opening the show with that topic.
Great.
Tell me about a little bit more about your interest in being involved with higher education
Great.
in the public sector
Great.
here, public schools. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ken. Well, you know, we have 29 campuses across the state for public higher education institutions, from our UMass campus to our state university system to our 15 community colleges. And my interest really started because I attended the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. I'm a Riverhawk, and so I
Okay.
care very deeply about public schools, but also because of how much they give back to the students of Massachusetts, and in turn, how much those students give back to our Commonwealth. You know, I think I saw a statistic not too long ago where 90% of our graduates from public higher ed stay in
Right.
one of our 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, invest in our economy. So they're really the lifeblood of our economic engine that is the Commonwealth.
Right.
And so that's why it's so critical to invest in them.
Right, and that statistic doesn't hold true with the private the private higher education, the private colleges, universities. We're delighted to have them. They do a great
Absolutely.
job and they have a great place.
Right.
But it's our public universities and colleges and our community colleges
Yep.
that really help our economy in that way, and then they also create that tiered effect in our local economy. You know, we've
Right.
got MIT, BU, Harvard
Absolutely.
filling the some of the upper echelon positions.
Right.
But our businesses come into this area knowing that we need middle management and we need office support and we need employment filled at all levels.
Absolutely.
And they know that we've got that. Not to mention even our, go to our vocational high schools and our high school education.
Absolutely. And if our business leaders here in Burlington will tell you that we need to invest more in our community colleges, in our state universities, in UMass, because those are the employees that they are going to hire once they finish their 2 or 4 years. So I would say in 2010, I really found at the State House there was a lack of advocacy for public higher education. So I began a caucus known as the Public Higher Education Caucus, along with, then he was a chairman of a committee, but now he is the Senate President, Stan Rosenberg. And it was really a focus on how we as legislators could better advocate for public higher education and look at public higher ed through the perspective of the entire Commonwealth. Because before I started the caucus, it was more legislators would advocate for their own campus. Like you would have one person advocating for UMass Lowell, another advocating for UMass Dartmouth, another advocating for Middlesex Community College. I felt that it was important to really advocate for higher ed in totality and fight for the 29 campuses, because
Right.
they lift us all up. And that's why I sponsored and filed the bill known as 50/50, because the level of state support for public higher education in the Commonwealth has gone down, or at the time had gone down literally 30%. And so I had filed the 50/50 bill, which increased state support for public higher ed about 25%. And what the bill said, Ken, was that 50% of a child's education or a student's education, 50% of that would be funded by the state. And at the same time, we would make that support, that investment in their education, that we would hold fees and tuition flat for a 2-year period. And that was a strong investment. We need to do more now, because it's been 3 or 4 years now since that bill passed and became law. But that was an important investment.
Yeah, and we do have to do more because it's a challenge that we have to meet. The reason being that strong public higher education helps everyone, not just the student and not just the family, but it helps our economy for the reasons that you said.
Yeah.
It's providing the educated workforce that companies look for when they come to Massachusetts.
Absolutely.
As we're filming this, we're looking at a snowstorm coming into the Burlington area tomorrow. So businesses don't come here for the weather. They're coming here because they want access to our educated workforce, which is why this is so
Right.
important. And we could continue to look at higher education, especially public higher education, as that which is funded through tuition. That means the students pay for the education entirely, and
Right.
some schools do that, the private schools.
Mhm.
Through public schools, though, we do have this partnership because we all benefit. And therefore, it's important when we look at the state budget and our values are reflected through the state budget that we show that support for the schools so that they can continue to operate on that model
Right.
of half public support and half tuition-based support.
Absolutely.
We also have savings opportunities for parents, for families through 529 plans. And I know we've beefed that up. Can you talk a little
We
bit
did.
about that, Sean?
Absolutely. So the 529 tax deduction program is something that's very, very important for obviously residents and working families in the Commonwealth. And to quite honestly, before last summer, we really lagged behind compared to other states in the region and across the country. And so in August, when you voted and I voted on the economic development bill, we increased opportunities for tax filers, single and married couples, to file for income tax deduction towards 529 plans. And so what that means is every time you open up a 529 account or put money into it as an individual, you can, it's for up to $1,000, and for married couples, it's $2,000. And that's an important investment, and that's something that we passed with the economic development bill.
Another issue that I know is very important to you is access to higher public education for students with particular, different types of learning challenges.
Right.
Can you talk about that bill that you filed?
Sure. So something that's very, very important is something known as the Inclusive Concurrent Enrollment Program. And it's the belief, and I believe it can, as I know you do, that education and higher education really is a civil right. And it's something that I think is so important. And there's a lot of students who would be able to go into a public higher education program, but don't, because either they couldn't pass the MCAS test for whatever the reason, or because they're not really accepted institutionally by that public higher education program. So what my bill does, and what's supported, Middlesex Community College is a strong supporter of this program, it really removes barriers and allows students who have Down syndrome, different level on the autism spectrum, to take public higher education courses. And the reason we want to do this is really all about outcomes. If you look at schools that have done this program, and if you look at graduation rates and where those students go 5, 10 years after those courses, compared to students with intellectual disabilities that did not participate in this program, it's really night and day. So this really is a civil right piece of legislation, and if implemented correctly by encouraging all 29 campuses to be involved in this in every region of the state, to allow all individuals who have some sort of a intellectual disability to take part in this program, the outcomes will be a lot better for these individuals in terms of employment and other opportunities that would come for these students. And that is better for the Commonwealth as a whole.
It is.
Because if all of our individuals with intellectual disabilities do better, then our communities do better, and our communities grow stronger.
Right, and more people can live independently, which saves
Right.
money for the Commonwealth and for their families in the long run.
Absolutely.
Education really is the best investment that we can make in the state, in the Commonwealth, and in our residents.
Right.
And this really goes around. Sometimes we hear from people who create sort of an equation that, well, we pay this much for education and test scores do this. And it's not a direct correlation, because sometimes the money that we're paying to education aren't reflected in test scores.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's reflected in inclusiveness. And sometimes
Absolutely.
it's reflected in opportunity.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's in a college or in a high school setting. It's reflected in an art program, which
Absolutely.
might turn on a kid, which might
Right.
be the reason they go to school in the morning, and it might be the reason that they pass their classes, and then upon graduation they become productive, tax-paying, independent citizens, where otherwise they might have been challenged.
Absolutely. And we all know people with intellectual disabilities. Maybe they're in your family, maybe they're your neighbors, they're certainly part of our community and our friends, and they should have the opportunity to go to college, just like your own son or daughter would have the opportunity to go to college. So that's what this program allows. And actually, UMass Boston is the model for this program across the country. So you have about 35 states that have invested in this program, and they all look at UMass Boston as the model, but yet we have not ourselves in Massachusetts passed this legislation across our state. So that's why it's so important just to pass this bill.
It is. It's a great opportunity for so many people, and thank you very much for
thank
filing
you.
it and for advocating
Well, thank you for your support for it.
Well, this is a tremendous opportunity that we have. Like I said, I mean, we're looking. Our values are reflected in the work that we do and in the votes that we take, but also in the advocacy, because the votes that we take, that's sort of, at that point the cake is baked. At that point, you bring it out of the oven, you say, do you like it or not? Right. It's easy to go to work that day and decide whether you like someone else's work or not. But you've rolled up your sleeves during the days we don't take votes. And that's when you've actually, gotten in and baked that cake and done that work and made these bills better, filed them in the first place and then stayed after them to make them better. And sometimes people they'll read the paper and say, well, you were in session for 30 minutes, right. You're in session for 3 hours. But again, that's the end of the story. Right. The real story is what we do when we're not in session in the work that we're filing.
Absolutely.
We have a little bit off of the education topic, but I want to come back to it, there's a program that's important to me, it's important to our district, and you filed it, and it's called Restorative Justice. And what it does is it takes a look at our criminal justice system in one way, which is that there are many instances where someone might be involved in the criminal justice system, but they don't have a history of having been charged with crimes. They've basically clean record, and they might have made a mistake or got involved in a situation that they were involved with the wrong people or something like that, and they could have got out of it. They made the wrong decision. Absolutely. And they show some regret. In those instances where if there's a victim, the victim also feels that, well, this isn't really a hardened criminal. This is something we could deal with. Right. And I don't mean to jump in and explain your bill, but restorative justice is one where we can get the victim, we can get the person accused of the crime together and see if we can work it out to satisfy everyone. And I appreciate your leadership on that.
Well, I know this is an issue that you care very deeply about because we've talked many, many times on restorative justice, and I appreciate your strong, not only support for the bill, but for your advocacy on the bill and for your work on restorative justice programs in Bedford and in Burlington. And I know you know firsthand how important it is. And for me, it really boils down to the concept of how much money we as a society spend on incarceration. Right. And how much we spend not only incarceration, but around nonviolent offenders in our incarceration system. We spend way too much money. And so what restorative justice tries to do, and you just explained it very thoroughly and succinctly, Ken, but we try to go back to the community. So the goal is, whether it's a first-time offender or a nonviolent offender, if it's agreed to by the responsible party and the victim, to really go into a setting within the community and to talk about it. And maybe there would be at the end of the restorative justice circle and the program, there'd be community service for the responsible party. Maybe there would be some restitution. But that individual, if the individual or responsible party completes all that's incumbent in the restorative justice process successfully, that individual won't get a record. And I think that's absolutely critical for that person's future. Right. If you look at somebody who commits a nonviolent offense, right, and you know this as your work as an attorney, that follows them for their entire life.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll tell you a story. Years ago, before I ever, served in the legislature as an attorney, I got involved in a situation where two people were involved in a fight late at night, and neither of them had a criminal record, but one charged the other with assault because in that case, one of them, the one that I represented, had his tooth knocked out. He had $5,000 in medical bills, and he said, all I really want is my medical bills paid. I don't want to ruin anybody's life. talked to the other lawyer, and it was a no-go, and we got ready to go to a trial. So we're taking up the court's time and all that. They
Yep.
each charged each other with assault in the fight type of thing. Both of them risking a criminal record. And I show up for court with my client in the morning. He's wearing jeans. And I said, I told you to dress up nice. This is court. You know, this isn't the way to dress. And he said, no, it's okay because I saw the other guy last night. And I told him, all I really wanted to do was get my dental bill paid, and you couldn't even do that. And he said, I'd do that, give me the chance, I'll do that. And they worked it out.
Mm-hmm.
They both came in, talked to each other, talked to me, and we worked it out that day. And the
great.
court clerk was satisfied because he said, as long as it's okay with you, then we can move on to other things,
Right.
other cases, because our court, we're overworked
Right.
here. We have too many cases. So we can work it out outside of the system where it's a real win-win-win. It's a win for each of them and a win for the court.
Absolutely, and that's a great case study for when it does work. But there are so many times when that doesn't happen.
Right.
And lives are literally ruined. Lives are ruined forever, right? And so much money is spent on the judicial system where it doesn't need to be, because
Right.
it needs to be back in the community. And this is a bill that the Bedford Police Chief supports strongly,
Correct.
Chief Bongiorno.
Yes.
And chiefs across Middlesex County have embraced restorative justice because that they see that it works. It's not pie in the sky. It's not kumbaya. Other folks have called it the hug it out bill. And it's really not. Police chiefs that know restorative justice know that this is actually anything but soft on crime.
Right.
That
Chief,
this is smart on crime.
it really is. Chief Kent also supports this
Great.
bill, as well as Chief Bobby Bongiorno
Great.
in Bedford, because they see they see these situations on a day-to-day basis. Now, it only works if it's voluntary. If the victim of the crime wants the situation to stay in court, it stays in court.
Right.
It only works with the right situation.
Absolutely.
And
And we recognize it's not going to work in every situation, but on the situations that it does, it can have a transformational change to the individual.
I described that story when it came to restorative justice, but going back to higher education and the access to higher education that we can provide through our public higher education, our universities, our college, our community colleges.
Mm-hmm.
You've been on the higher education committee now for quite some time, a couple of sessions now, right,
Mm-hmm.
as vice chair. And I'm sure that you hear stories about the experiences that people have with our schools in our school system.
Right.
It's a great opportunity that I've had to. One of the things I've enjoyed the most is sitting in committees and hearing residents come in and talk about life in Massachusetts, how it can be better, but also usually what they like about it.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that you hear from people coming in to talk about their experience with higher education?
Well, and that's a great question, but since you've allowed me kind of to segue, I want to get back to one of the issues that people really like, and that is what we did in August with the 529s. But one thing that has been very clear is that when people come to testify before us, most people, certainly not all, but most people that set up a 529 account for their child, they're either wealthy or upper middle class. You don't have a lot of people who are lower middle class or in poverty who set up a 529 account for their child. So one bill that I did file that many people have come before the committee to support would be a universal college savings account for every child born in the Commonwealth that would come with some seed money from the state. So what that would mean is every child who's born in one of our cities and towns in Massachusetts through the Treasury would have a CSA, a college savings account, set up in his or her child's name. And it would grow with interest. And it would only be used, obviously, if the student stays in Massachusetts, goes to college. If they don't, it would go back to the general fund in the Treasury where the CSA is set up for every child born in Massachusetts. But the reason we want to do this, Ken, is it allows everybody to understand and be able to build up that confidence as a family that, yes, we can send our child to college. and that is just so important. And a statistic that just to
Yeah.
bear this out a little bit, 40% of kids are more likely to go to college with a college savings account than without. So you're 40% more likely to go to college if you have a CSA than if you don't have one. So that's why this bill is really so important. But that kind of goes back to the 529 discussion.
Well, that's important, and when you think about it, not only might a student be more likely to go to college, but also to stay there.
Exactly.
Because they're not so burdened with the debt.
Exactly.
And then thinking it through, if the money that's not used for college, a student, do they have to go to college in Massachusetts to qualify? Or
They would.
Okay,
They would.
so if they go out of state or they don't go at all, which would be a large percentage, the money goes back into the fund.
Correct.
And then I would imagine that it gets used to fund the newborns.
Exactly.
So therefore, with the interest that's building up, this would be self-funded pretty quickly.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what a great way to help people without ultimately coming out of the taxpayer.
Absolutely.
Because it self-funds, it's
Right.
self-generating. That's very creative, and I compliment you on that.
That's certainly the goal. That's certainly the goal. And we're trying to build that confidence on families that they can send their child to college, right, in our gateway cities and across the Commonwealth.
What's the response that you've gotten from that?
I'm very supportive. People really understand the importance of it. It's actually received some national attention for being a model. And I've also received a lot of attention from businesses who are considering investing in a universal CSA program, because as we talked about earlier, business owners know how important it is to invest in their students because they are the future workforce. So many of them see this as an opportunity to invest in young kids and families to try to build up that confidence to allow them to go to college. Maine has a similar program, Universal CSA program, but it's actually funded by business owners because they see how important this potential is for the workforce of the state of Maine.
Doesn't that send a strong message?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's great. And we've got a couple of minutes left in our show. Are there other pieces of legislation that you filed that you want to talk a little bit about before we close out?
Well, I appreciate that opportunity, Ken. I guess talking about some of the challenges in public higher education would be important. We need to obviously invest more in our students and our campuses. You said earlier how important it is that the state pays, funds Middlesex community colleges and all 29 of our campuses, from our community colleges, state universities, to our UMass system. But there are some deep challenges that we have. Obviously, there's budgetary challenges to keep that investment going, but that's really, really important. But as we invest more in our students in our colleges, we have to make sure that, one, that we deal with the issues around collective bargaining, and two, that we deal with the issues of deferred maintenance on our campuses. So I think the two biggest challenges for us, and what I would implore the administration to do, is that we need to fund collective bargaining. And it's never a comfortable conversation, but we talk about the salaries of our professors across Massachusetts. Those are negotiated in good faith. The Commonwealth has to pay those.
Right.
And so it's important to pay that investment so that when we increase the appropriation to our 29 campuses, that money is not being deferred to salaries. So it's really important that we fund collective bargaining, because that money, it's obligated under law, so that money has to come from somewhere. So it's important that we as a state fund collective bargaining so that it doesn't come out of our students.
Right.
And two, there is about $1 billion backlog in deferred maintenance. So I think Middlesex Community College would agree, both the Bedford campus and the Lowell campus, and that is that we need to do a better job. And I would implore Governor Baker to invest more in capital so that we can upkeep these campuses, especially the 15 campuses of community colleges. So those are two of the challenges that we have as legislators, but very, very important for the future of public higher education.
Well, thank you very much for your advocacy for that and for these other issues surrounding not only public higher education, but all of the issues that you've been the leader on, a leader on in Beacon Hill. Folks, that'll do it for another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon here with Representative Sean Garbally. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time.
Thank you, Ken.